So, ladies and gentlemen, as I explained, we were taking the doctor out of order. We're now shifting back to the state's side, and the state will continue now to present its testimony.
Thank you, Judge. We would call Captain David Laughlin to the stand.
I solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Scared I'm moving so well over here. Sorry.
It's all right.
Okay.
You can get the microphone.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, sir. I know you've already been introduced to the jury, so why don't you please just for the record state your name and spell your last name.
Captain David Laughlin. It's Laughlin.
And, sir, how are you employed?
City of Akron Police Department.
And how long have you been with the Akron Police Department?
21 years.
Prior to working with the Akron Police Department, did you have any prior law enforcement or military experience?
No, sir.
When you, in order to become an Akron police officer, what did you have to do?
Go through obviously the application process, background investigations, psychological, drug screening, a full background investigation, and then interviewed by the chief and offered a position, a conditional job offer that's conditional on passing the academy and state test.
Okay. And at that time, the city of Akron had their own police academy, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you go through their academy?
Yes, sir.
And how long is that academy when you took it?
Back then it was 16 weeks.
16 weeks?
Yes.
And was that like every day, 9 to 5 type job, or what was it?
Every day, 8 hours a day. There was some evening homework, PT involved, but it was essentially full time.
And then did you have to take tests throughout that?
There's some internal testing that we did, proficiency testing for driving, firing range, PT testing, and ultimately we had to pass the state written test.
Okay. So in your training, that ultimate 16-week training was ultimately to get you to the OPATA test?
That is correct.
And that's the Ohio Police Officers Training Academy test?
Yes, sir.
And what is that? What is that test? Who puts it on?
It's put on by the state governing body.
All right. And that is to certify people in the state of Ohio to become law enforcement officers, police officers, things of that nature?
Yes, sir.
All right. So you went through the academy. Did you take the test?
Yes.
And you passed the test, obviously?
Absolutely.
Okay. And in order to maintain that certification, there's anything you have to do each year?
We're mandated to take different updates that the state mandates, and that's handled through our training bureau to ensure that we are maintaining all of our appropriate certifications.
All right. And have you done that up to today?
Yes, sir.
All right. So basically you have been a law enforcement officer in good standing since the day you took your test and were certified till today?
Yes, sir.
All right. Since the time that you took that test and got hired on the force, tell us where you were initially signed.
I was initially assigned to our midnight of our patrol division, our uniform subdivision, for about 4 years until I got promoted to the rank of sergeant.
All right. And that was 4 years on midnights?
Yes, sir.
All right. And is that typically where your newest rookies go, is the midnight shift?
Yeah. More than night shifts, yes. They tell you you're not going to need sunglasses for quite a while.
Okay. And so you did that for 4 years, you got promoted to sergeant, and then what happened?
I was on midnights for a brief time period, about 6 months or less in our communications center, and then I earned a bid to one of our afternoon shifts. It was a noon to 8 shift as a patrol supervisor.
And just so the jury knows, what do you have to do in order to be promoted to sergeant?
At that time it was a written examination followed by what's called an assessment center. It's put on by a private company that the city contracts to come in, and they test you on the skills necessary to be a sergeant as outlined by the police department.
All right.
And then obviously ultimately you have to have an interview with the chief and the deputy chiefs to be approved for that.
So it's not an automatic thing where if you do this A, B, and C, you get the job no matter what?
Definitely not.
All right. So you have to be accepted and interviewed even if you pass all the tests?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so now you're on your day shift, you're the sergeant. As a sergeant, what are your duties?
I was a patrol supervisor, so as a first line supervisor in our patrol unit.
And following that, what did you do?
I was then, after probably about 2 years ago, I earned the rank of lieutenant.
How long ago?
About 2 years ago.
2 years ago,
Yes,
okay.
sir.
And so you were a sergeant on patrol for how many years would that be?
Gosh, 10, 11, I don't know, quite some time. I did a few temporary assignments and other ancillary things along the way, but my primary job assignment was as a patrol sergeant.
Okay. And then, so you became a lieutenant. As a lieutenant, where did you go?
I initially started as it's called assistant shift commander of it was called our platoon 4, which is 7 at night to 3:30 in the morning. I was there initially.
Okay. And what were your duties as a lieutenant?
Obviously, to work in conjunction with the captain, who was the shift commander, so it was doing scheduling, time off books, approving any disciplines before they get forward along, any uses of force. Basically, it was working hand in hand with the captain of all the administrative duties for our shift.
Okay. And then at some point in time, did you move into the detective bureau?
Yes, sir.
And when would that have been?
That was December of 2016.
Okay. And in the detective bureau, what did you do?
I was the 3 to 11 major crimes commander. It's called general assignment.
All right. So from 3 to 11, you would be in charge of
The detectives working during those hours.
And what types of crimes would those detectives be investigating?
Generally we call our major crimes, our serious felonies, robberies, rapes, homicides, stabbings, other shootings, so any violent offense.
Okay. And in your duties as a DB lieutenant, did you also at times get involved in the investigations of cases?
Yes.
All right. And so let me direct your attention, well, and I guess I should complete this to give you your due. Now you're currently a captain?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that is a recent development?
Yeah, that was end of June 2017.
Okay, and so now have your duties then changed from being in the Lieutenant DB?
That is correct.
So what do you do now?
I'm currently the captain in our patrol operations office. It's the administrative arm of our entire uniform subdivision. So if someone's in a uniform, they fall under us.
Okay, very good. All right, so now let me direct your attention back to March 20th, 2017. Were you working on that day?
Yes, I was.
And that was still the 3 to 11 shift, correct?
Yes, sir.
And obviously we've been talking about the shooting that took place sometime around 9 p.m. that evening.
Yes,
did you get involved in that?
Yes, I did.
And how did you become involved?
The way the process works is when patrol responds to any kind of a violent crime, in particular this, the death of another, they call into the detective bureau to report it to us, and then the detectives respond out to the scene to take over the investigation.
All right. So did you go to the scene?
Yes, sir.
And did you have other detectives go with you, or did you send them separately?
We didn't ride together, but we all responded at the same time, yes.
Okay. When you get to the scene, so that the jury understands the process, detectives are not the first responders, correct?
That's correct.
How is the whole system set up to work?
So the patrol units respond first. We get the call. By the time we arrive, the scene has been established, it's been stabilized. The crime scene is taped off, manned by people in the uniform subdivision, and monitored that way, and monitor and vet who comes in and out of that crime scene.
All right. So on this occasion, if you recall, what time would you have arrived on that scene?
Probably about 9:15, 10 after 9.
Okay. And when you get there, what do you find?
I initially actually had to park across the street from Eastwood and Danby. There's a establishment there. I parked there because the road was blocked, and we actually had the crime scene taped down, essentially down to Eastwood in that general proximity on the southern end of it.
Okay. And so you park there, you get there, and what do you see when you get to the crime scene?
I mean, I see the overhead lights on the uniformed cars that are within the crime scene. And obviously there's a uniformed officer who's there maintaining, we call our crime scene log. Anybody who comes in or out has to report into that person, so we know who's been in or out of the scene.
And when you get there, how do you find out what's going on?
After I signed in, I walked in to the scene, and I was approached by one of the patrol on-scene commanders who was most knowledgeable, and they gave me a brief overview of what happened.
All right. And at that point in time, are people, and I say people, police officers and or detectives, trying to gather information from potential witnesses?
Yes, sir. Another component of it, we do what's called a neighborhood canvass, and usually patrol officers handle that initial function. So they'll go door to door, knocking and speaking to residents to get their information and see if they witnessed anything about whatever the incident might have been, in this case, the shooting of Keith Johnson.
And ultimately, when you get into this investigation, do you believe that everybody that was present during that shooting had been found and interviewed?
Initially, because there's so many people outside the tape, so many uniformed people involved, at that point in time, I believe that we had either initially interviewed everybody or had everybody still on scene that we would want to interview at that point in time. Obviously, it was still an evolving situation.
So you didn't necessarily interview everybody right at that moment, but they were at least made contact with everybody that was present so that you could interview them sometime in the near future?
Correct. Either by myself or one of the detectives or by someone from the uniform division.
All right. So as your role in this investigation went, how would you be basically the coach that's kind of leading everybody what to do? You do this, you do this, you do this kind of thing?
Yeah, out on scene, basically when we arrive on scene as the on-scene commander for the major crimes, I'm in charge of the scene at that point to direct the activities of people that, based on the information I have at that point in time. Now, obviously, there's some who have their specialty and function. I don't tell them how to do their job, but we make sure all the pieces are trying to fit all the pieces together. All
right. So your job is not to do everything, but is it fair to say that everything that's done should come back to you so that you can put it all together into a investigation and basically determine maybe what happened?
Yeah, myself in conjunction with the other investigators that are a part of it, which it's all compiled together. Yes.
All right. So in this case, you get there, you tell us what you found, you got briefed, canvases are done, names are provided to you. What is the next thing that basically happens in this investigation?
Obviously, I did a brief walkthrough of the scene. I didn't want to get too close because I didn't want to contaminate any evidence. As you saw in the crime scene photos, I viewed the majority of that, obviously not in depth of looking at every single house up close and personal like they took of all the residents, but I saw the vehicles, I saw the dirt bike, I saw Mr. Johnson, I saw the truck, I saw the firearm. So I kind of got an overview of what the scene looked like before it was processed by crime scene and the medical examiner.
And in this case, let's strike that. In some cases that you handle that are homicides, the investigation starts with trying to figure out who did it, correct?
Correct.
In this case, that was not necessary. Is that true?
That's correct.
And why is that?
Because it was clearly established by his own admission that Mr. Knight was the shooter of Mr. Johnson.
All right, and that was on the 911 call?
That is correct.
Okay. So for you, all of a sudden that truncates a lot of your normal type investigation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. At that point in time, once you know who the shooter is, do you just stop?
No.
Okay, so now what do you need to do?
Well, I ensured that crime scene was responding and processing and worked with them, ensuring, because we had the vehicles on scene, which vehicles that we were going to be towing to the garage for processing, just making sure that everything that we needed on the scene was being handled by the appropriate officer or division that should be taking care of those things.
And was it pretty clear at that point in time that, in your mind, that this was going to be some sort of a self-defense claim?
Yes.
Okay. And so in regards to the self-defense claim, was it important to you then to figure out more or exactly, or to the best of your ability, what actually happened and led up to the ultimate act of shooting Mr. Johnson?
That's correct.
All right. And then what did you do in order to do that? You told us about the cars.
Once we established everything was being handled or had been handled, still on scene was Mr. Knight in one cruiser. Mr. Gill, Curtis Gill, was in another cruiser, and Michelle Gill was in a separate. All three of them were in separate cars.
All right. And why did you keep them in separate cars?
We don't like to have, for lack of better terms, contamination. We want to have each person's perspective of what happened to be independent of influence from somebody else.
Now, of course, that would be great in a perfect world, right?
Yes.
But in this situation, do you know one way or the other whether Mr. Knight and his daughter or son-in-law were able to communicate with one another prior to the police arriving?
I don't know the exact, I don't remember that, but I do remember letting a uniform officer know to make sure that they were separated, and I believe for a short period of time that, I'm not sure who, they might have been in similar cruisers, but I wasn't the one who actually handled that. I made sure that Uniform Subdivision took care of that.
Well, we at least know from the 911 call that Michelle Gill, who was on 911 call that we heard earlier, and her father, they at least passed the phone to one another, right?
That's correct.
So we know they're in at least physical, a similar area, correct?
Correct.
All right. But we don't know what the communication they might have had without others being present.
Right. Prior to police arriving and securing them in cruisers, we don't know any communication between anybody who's on scene prior to our arrival.
All right. So you continue on with your investigation. What do you do next? What happens next?
Next step was to have Curtis Gill, Michelle Gill, and William Knight transported down to the Detective Bureau of the Police Department for in-depth interviews.
All right. And do you interview them?
Yes, we do.
All right. So you interview Curtis Gill.
I interviewed Curtis, yes.
Michelle Gill.
I did not personally interview Michelle, but Michelle was interviewed by the investigators on the case.
And you had an opportunity to review that. And
Yes, sir.
Isaac Spragling,
Isaac Spragling was interviewed.
Brandon Ward,
Brandon was interviewed. Yes, I interviewed Brandon.
Justin Badgett,
Yes, I interviewed Justin Badgett.
and there was a fellow named Brian Cross.
Brian Cross was interviewed twice.
Okay. And trying to think.
Bianca Martin.
Bianca Martin. Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Bianca Martin.
Bianca Martin, yes.
And so you didn't, did you do all those interviews? You already said one.
I did not do all of those, and those were not all the first night. Those were all interviewed through the course of the investigation.
But as the lead person in charge, you would have had the ability to review those, learn what was said in those interviews in order to try and put together what happened that night.
Yes, sir.
Okay. While these interviews are going on, are there any other things going on?
Obviously, the crime scene unit is processing, having the cars moved to our processing garage, tagging of evidence. Obviously, Mr. Johnson is taken to the medical examiner's office. Other folks are engaged in the investigation in other capacities.
Okay. And during these interviews, are there cell phones that are being, I guess, confiscated or retained for purposes of trying to determine if there's any relevant information on them?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And whose phones, if you recall, would have been collected?
We had Curtis, Michelle, and Mr. Knight's phones.
All right. And as far as Mr. Knight's phone went, was there anything that you determined was on that phone, or was it even used any time during this period that was relevant?
No, sir.
Okay. But you were able to get Michelle and Curtis's phone?
Yes, sir.
When you get somebody's phone, what are you able to look at and find with those phones?
We have specialists that extract the information out of phones. It can be images, text messages, the actual messages themselves. phone call history, but not what's on the phone calls and the dates and times that those occurred. So it's a full report of what's extracted out of those phones.
All right. And so once you have Curtis Gill's version of events, Michelle Gill's version of events, plus the events, the versions of the other individuals, Brandon, Isaac, those other people, are you then able to look at the phone records to see how they all fit in and match up with these versions of events?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I'm assuming that it is, like most people's phones, full of phone calls, text messages to a variety of different people. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And so you would have had to weed through the unrelated stuff to find the related stuff.
That would be correct.
And so did you have an opportunity to do that?
Yes, sir.
So for purposes of convenience, did you then kind of just provide in your reports, your report of investigation, the pertinent text messages and phone calls that were made by the parties here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So starting, and I know you have all the phone numbers. We won't necessarily refer to them as the phone numbers, but who's associated with the phone that's being called, okay?
Okay.
So starting with the first relevant phone call or text message you find related to this case, who is that from and who is it to?
That was from Curtis to Michelle.
And what time would that have been?
5:29 p.m.
Okay, and let's talk about that too. The time. When you get the phone records, you can get a printout, correct?
Correct.
But you can also look at the actual phone too. Is that true?
Yes, sir.
All right, so when you look for the time on these calls, was there any discrepancies between these things?
I used the phone records that were extracted, and I noticed that from the report and looking at how they aligned, that Michelle and Curtis's phones were off by 2 minutes. So the exact same one on Curtis and the exact same one on Michelle's was 2 minutes, even though it was the exact wording and it was the exact text message or exact phone call.
All right, so when Curtis, and we'll just use an example just for demonstrative purposes, Curtis texts Michelle at 1 o'clock exactly, but when you look at Michelle's phone, it says 1:02.
I don't remember which direction it was,
Right,
but 2 minutes one way or the other. But yes, that would be a fair statement, yes.
So we don't know exactly which one was the correct time, but is that 2 minutes consistent all the way through?
Yes, sir.
All right, so basically we're in a range of 2 minutes either way.
Yes, sir.
All right, so you said the first one was at 5:29, and who was it? Tell us again who that was from and to?
That was from Curtis to Michelle.
Okay, and what was the message? Was it a text or a call?
It was a text.
And what was the message?
It said, just found the 85. Shelby's old boyfriend has it posted for sale.
All right, and the 85, what did you believe that to be?
I believe it to be the dirt bike, their stolen dirt bike.
Okay, and that, okay, so what would be the next text or call that you found relevant?
So then, subsequent to that, Curtis made 4 calls to various numbers at the police department.
Okay.
One was to a fax line, which obviously would not have been answered. Next one was to our chief's office, which at 5:45 was closed. And then 2 other times he called was our detective bureau desk, which would have been answered by one of my detectives.
All right, and so do you know whether those calls went through or not?
I don't know if they went through, I just know that those were outgoing calls.
On his phone records?
That is correct.
Okay, so he did make 2 calls to the Akron Police Department Detective Bureau. Then what was the next call or text that was important?
The next communication was he texted Ambrose.
Okay, and Ambrose, tell us about Ambrose.
Ambrose is a friend of Curtis. I believe that they met through riding and had a dirt bike riding relationship. So they were both very into the sport.
All right, so because we had testimony earlier by Justin Badgett, who was referring to Mr. Gill as Ambrose.
Correct.
When you say that Gill called Ambrose, he's calling the actual Ambrose.
Yes, the actual Ambrose, but his last name is Kolaski, I believe, Ambrose Kolansky.
Okay.
That is the real person.
All right. And what time was that call made?
That was at 6:38 p.m. And I'm sorry, the phone call was at 5:59 p.m.
Okay.
I apologize.
All right. And then following that phone call, what happened next?
Then the next thing was Curtis sent a text to Ambrose at 6:38 p.m.
All right. And what was that text?
Said, I can't get him to respond yet. It's got the generic shifter on it from the old pit bike still. The pegs are off. Teddy 80, hard to tell, but still has a generic hydraulic clutch on it.
Okay. And as a detective, what did you think the relevance was of this message?
What he's telling Ambrose is that he has sent a message and some sort of communication to the seller, who was Justin Badgett, and he hasn't responded back to Curtis as far as trying to possibly make the purchase of the bike.
Okay. And following that 5:38 text, what was the next call or text that was significant?
The next call was at 6:43 p.m. Curtis called our communication center, so our dispatch.
All right, so that's your dispatch center. It's the would that be the non-emergency, non-911 call?
Correct.
Okay. And of course, you don't have the content of that particular call in your report, but it is available, correct?
That is correct. All of our lines into our communication center are recorded.
All right. And you had an opportunity to listen to that?
Yes.
Okay. What's the next call or text that was significant to your investigation?
Following that, at 6:51, Gil called a number 375-2988, which is not a phone number that would be in the Akron Police Department. So I don't know if he misdialed or thought he was calling a number at the police department, but that would have not been a number at our police department.
All right, but you put it in there because it's a similar number exchange for your police department?
Correct, yeah, similar, that my interpretation of it is he was trying to make some communication with the Akron Police Department.
All right. Next.
Next was 6:54, he called our juvenile auto theft and missing persons unit.
All right, and that would be relevant because he had an auto theft.
Yeah, stolen dirt bike, correct.
Okay. While we're talking about the auto theft, there's been testimony about the fact that the bike had been stolen sometime before this incident. Did you look into whether there was an actual police report that had been filed by Curtis Gill about that bike?
There was a report as being investigated by Detective Rodebeck in our burglary unit because it was stolen from a garage. It would have been classified as a B&E or a burglary, so it would have been handled primarily by that unit within our division.
All right, and do you remember when that report would have been taken by the Akron Police Department?
Sometime in 2016. I believe about a year-ish before this incident.
All right. It was not 2 or 3 months before this incident, though,
No,
was
it was a significant time period.
All right. Okay, following the call to the juvenile auto theft and missing persons unit, what's the next texture call that was relevant?
Following that, there were 3 straight calls from Ambrose calling Curtis. First one was at 7:05, then 7:12, then 7:35.
All right. And of course, you don't know the context or
No, sir.
content of those conversations.
No, sir.
What's next?
At 7:39, Curtis called our communications center again.
Okay. And now, this has been 2 hours now since the very first text where he's telling Michelle that he thinks he's found the bike. True?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So he calls the communication center again. Then what happens after that?
Then at 7:42, Curtis called Justin Badgett.
Okay. So would that be at 7:42 the first time that there is a call to the person trying to sell the bike?
That I have record of, yes, from Mr. Gill to Mr. Badgett.
All right, because you don't know if Ambrose was trying to call Mr. Badger or not?
We don't know that, but, you know, through the investigation, we believe that's what happened, yes.
All right, well, and we believe that from the text that Ambrose was trying to communicate with him through that sale website, correct?
Correct. Yeah, when Curtis couldn't get a response from Justin, his communication with Ambrose, then Ambrose tried to make communication with Justin and was successful. I don't know why Curtis couldn't, but Ambrose was successful and able to reaching out to Justin.
All right, and so then at that point, based on Justin's testimony, it appears that Mr. Gill then started taking on the persona of Ambrose in order to continue that communication.
Yes, sir.
All right, what happened after the call to Ambrose? Called to Badgett.
Next one was at 7:46. Michelle texted Curtis 1317 Leonora. And then it says there's a period then LY. I don't know what the LY was. Could have just been a, you know, finger hitting before it went, but it said 1317 Leonora.
Okay. And what significance did that have to you?
Well, the point that we got back to it, that Leonora was where Curtis was supposed to meet Justin Badgett.
All right. And so that was, you said at what time?
7:46.
7:46 p.m.
Yes, sir.
All right. What was the next call or text of significance?
The next one was 1 minute later at 7:47. Badgett texted Curtis, call me when you're 15 minutes out.
Okay. What next?
Right after that, Gill texted Badgett, yup, already driving.
Okay. And then what's the next?
4 minutes later at 7:51, Curtis texted Michelle, said, of course, go down Evans and catch a train, but he thinks coming from 45 minutes away.
Okay. And it actually wasn't away, was it?
A-G-A-Y, I apologize if I want to be the exact quotation. A-G-A-Y was a misspelling.
Okay, you believe that to mean away?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what did you believe that to mean?
That Curtis, possibly trying to buy time, told Badgett that he was 45 minutes away when, of course, he was not that far away, just to try to buy time. My belief is he was trying, since he called our communication center twice, he was trying to get a cruiser there to meet him to go to Leonora, so he's just trying to buy some time.
All right. So at this point in time, and you heard the communication center calls, he was waiting for a police officer?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He was buying time?
Yes, sir.
So he felt it important, apparently, to do that?
Yes.
Okay. And so then, what's the next thing that we have here?
1 minute later, 7:52, Curtis texted Michelle, says it's just all aggravation and amped up to get it back in the same sense.
Okay. What's next?
1 minute later, Michelle replied back, I know we will.
All right. So at this point in time, I think there was some testimony earlier from Officer Arroyo that there's priority calls, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Tell us about how that works in your dispatch and your 911 center.
When calls come into the call center, it's answered by our call taker. Based on the interaction they have with the person on the phone, they code the call and automatically comes up with a priority of, I believe, 1 through 7. Obviously, 1's higher priority, 7 is a lower priority, and we respond to calls, higher priority calls first.
Okay. And so at some point in time, did you learn that, well, I should ask you this. Are you familiar with the code for checking on a possible stolen vehicle?
That,
property?
I'm not positive, but as a lower priority, probably about a 6 on our scale, 5-6 range. I believe it's on a lower end of seriousness for response.
So, and at this point in time, the Akron Police Department is only going to investigate a suspected or being requested to come in to verify or check a suspected stolen item.
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So as a result of that low priority, the officers that are working that district are going to other type calls.
That's correct. Additionally, to point out is the way our shifts align. A shift was coming off at 7:30 p.m. That was the end of their shift, so they're usually in the station about 6:30 for end of shift time. The other shifts at roll call at 7, so that kind of is an overlap time where one shift is off, one shift is not quite out, so our 3 to 11 shift has to manage all of the calls.
All right, so you may have been down some cars.
Yeah, staffing might have been low, so call volume can build up because they can only answer one at a time, and they answer the most serious ones, obviously a higher priority.
All right. And just to give it an idea, we said the lower call would be that property crime, but what would be, the higher ends of that?
If you get up into verbal fights, would escalate it a little bit, physical fights escalate it, suspicious person that is could be a lower end of that, but then if it's a suspicious person with a weapon, and then on up to shooting, stabbings obviously are at the top of the list when there's serious injury.
And so based on the conversations that you were able to hear on those communications calls by Curtis Gill, is that what was occurring? He was being pushed down, and did they let him know he was being pushed down, or not being pushed down, but basically he had to wait until a car was available?
Right. They didn't detail out our call prioritizing system, but obviously they told him that they did not have somebody available to send at that time.
All right, very good. So Michelle says, I know we will. She's trying to, well, strike that. So what happens, what's next as far as the calls or text messages?
Next thing is a phone call at 7:55 from Curtis to Michelle.
Okay, and again, we don't know what the context of that call was.
Correct.
What's next?
7:55 again, right after that, obviously with the 2-minute time, not sure the proximity exactly, but Michelle texted Curtis, may want to see if the cops can find out if 1317 is a good address, not able to pull it up on Google Maps, showing an individual house, it's just showing the road. Want to make sure it's not at his mom's house, her grandmother's, or whoever's, and they're just trying to see what's going on first.
Okay. What's next?
At 8:04, Michelle called Curtis, but it was a missed call.
Okay, next?
Right after that, Curtis texted Michelle, says, well, no cop yet.
Next?
Right after that, Michelle texted Curtis, oh, thought you seen him, ?
Okay, and did you, based on your investigation at that point, have any idea of what she was referring to there?
No, I mean, him could have been police, it could have been Justin, I don't know who the him was.
Okay. What was the next call or text of relevance?
Then right after that, Curtis had a missed call from Michelle, and then he subsequently called her right back.
Okay. And then what's next?
That was at 8:05. At 8:06, Michelle called Curtis, and at 8:07, Michelle called Curtis again.
Okay. So there's a bunch of calls and texts going back and forth.
Yeah, they're picking up.
All right. What's next?
At 8:10, Curtis called back our communication center.
Okay. And what's the next thing that happens?
And then at 8:13, Curtis texted Michelle and said, nice, officer tied up.
And what happened next, or what's the next call or text?
8:14, Michelle texted back, shit happens, don't know how long it's been, or if you have to call him back or get another officer.
Okay. And after that, what's the next thing that appears?
Curtis texted Badgett that says, GPS says 20 minutes.
Okay. And at this point, based on the other text, it appears would appear that he's lying at this point.
Yeah, still trying to buy time. It's 7:51 was the first one, and this one was at 8:15, so yeah, still trying to buy some time.
All right. And so what would be the next text or call?
The next one was from right after that, Curtis sent a text at 8:14 to Michelle, only talking to dispatch.
Okay. And then after that?
Then he texted her again, just told Justin 20 or so, see if he responds, ... and he did.
Okay, and then what do you have next?
5 minutes later at 8:20, Justin called Curtis.
Okay, so now we have the seller talking to Curtis again.
Correct.
Okay, and what is the next thing that happens?
Then 5 minutes later at 8:25, Curtis texted Badgett, says be there shortly.
Okay,
Then,
and next?
Then right after that, he called our communications center again.
Okay, what happens after that?
2 minutes later, Curtis called Michelle.
Okay,
4 minutes later at 8:31, Michelle called Curtis.
all right, what happens after that?
Then at 8:33, Gil texted Badgett, said here, not sure what house.
All right, so now we are approximately less than 30 minutes from when we know the incident happens, correct?
Correct.
All right. This is the first time where we know, based on the calls, that there's contact where they're in the same vicinity, correct?
Correct, yeah, obviously,
All right.
based on that Curtis was somewhere in the general vicinity.
So we know that at 8:33, or based on this text, that he is at probably Leonora,
Correct, he's on Leonora.
excuse me.
Correct.
All right, so what happens next?
Next, Badgett called Curtis right back after the text that Curtis sent to Badgett.
Okay, and then after that?
4 minutes later, 8:37, Curtis texted Michelle and said he bringing it from down the road.
Okay. And based on what your investigation at that point, what did you believe this to mean?
That the bike wasn't on Leonora with Justin, that whoever the he was bringing the bike to them on Leonora.
Okay. So what's the next text or call?
8:38, Curtis texted Michelle and said that doesn't recognize me.
All right. And what significance does that mean to you in the context of your investigation?
That Justin didn't recognize Curtis as the prior dating relationship of Michelle's family in some way.
Okay. Because we heard Michelle on the 911 call refer to say we know who he is, and gives the relationship.
Correct. Yeah, they recognized him, but Justin didn't recognize them.
Okay. All right. So what was the next call or text?
8:38, right after that, Curtis texted Michelle, we need to get a cop here.
What's the next thing then?
Right after that, Michelle responded back to Curtis, trying to get my damn GPS to work. We could also hang back and see where he ends up taking it to.
All right. And then what happens next?
Then at 8:39, Justin called Keith Johnson.
Okay. And then, of course, we don't have any context of what was said.
Correct.
So what's the next thing we know?
Right after that, 8:39, Curtis texted Michelle saying it's not here yet.
Okay. From that, what did you believe, based on your investigation, where did you believe Curtis Gill was?
That he was on Leonora with Justin, which I believe his address is 1325 Leonora.
All right. So based on that, he has not left Leonora yet?
Correct.
Okay. What's next?
Right after that, Michelle texted back to Curtis, do you want me to call?
Then what?
Michelle texted Curtis again, let me know, still on way.
Okay. Next?
8:41, Curtis called Michelle.
After that?
8:46, Curtis texted Michelle, Danmead Street.
Okay. So this is the first time we hear about Dan Mead.
Correct.
And that was 8:46, approximately 9 minutes from when Michelle calls 911 that we heard earlier.
Yeah, she called it at, 20:53, I believe?
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought
20:50.
That was 20:55, but
20:55, yeah. So, yeah.
whatever's on the tape.
Correct, yeah, whatever's there.
All right. So what's next then?
8:47, Curtis texted Michelle, it's it.
And based on your investigation, what did that text mean to you?
That Curtis verified or had knowledge that that was their stolen dirt bike.
All right. So that, based on the investigation, would indicate at 2:47 or 8:47, Curtis is now at Dan Mead, looking at the bike.
That's correct. Even the text before, when Gil texted Michelle, said Dan Mead Street, he spelled it exactly correctly. So he would have seen a street sign or known how to spell the street to know where it's at. He would have been on the street at that point.
Okay. So after he says it's it in a text, what next?
8:49, Curtis texted Michelle saying, "Get here."
And that was 2 minutes after he told her it's it.
Correct.
Okay, what's next?
8:51, Michelle texted Curtis, "We found this tree just trying to get there."
Okay, and that we found this tree. Do you have any idea what that would mean?
Well, the text that follows up right after, it says, "We're trying to find the street."
Okay.
So I would suspect it might have been a misspelling for street and put tree, could have been an autocorrect situation.
All right, next text.
8:52, Curtis texted Michelle, he writing it.
Okay, and based on, again, the investigation, of course, the testimony here, what did that mean to you?
That Curtis, Keith Johnson's riding the dirt bike.
Okay. What's the next text?
8:53, Michelle texted Curtis, says, "We talked and I think they're here, I'm trying to text."
And did you have any concept of what that meant based on your investigation?
None.
Okay. And then at 20:55.
Michelle texted Curtis, "We are here."
All right. So now if the 911 call from Michelle indicates it was at 20:55 on the 911 call, and her call here is at 20:55, can we assume that hers was off by the 2 minutes being later? In other words, it was actually
Correct,
20:53.
yes. Correct, yes.
Okay. All right. So what's the next text?
The next one, Gil texted Michelle, said, "Get out, come here," followed up by Dad too.
And that was at the same time, 20:54, 8:54?
Yeah, that was 8:54 that would have been by Michelle's time.
Okay.
Apologize.
And then what is the next?
The very next is 8:55, Michelle calls our communication center.
All right, so that's actually, has two times that are the same. It has Michelle texting Gil at 2:55 or 8:55, and then she's calling the communication center at 8:55 on your sheet. Do we know how that could?
Would have been the difference in the call logs. The 8:55 would have been from the 911.
Okay, so that was the Michelle's call. You took that from the 911 center, not from her phone.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and then so it, what is the next thing you had then that was significant?
The next one was at 8:57. There was a witness who called the communication center to report the altercation or the ongoing. It wasn't anything. There had not been a shooting yet, but there was a witness who called it into our communication center.
All right, and did you ultimately end up identifying that individual?
Yes, sir.
And who was that individual?
Gerald Bench, I believe is his last name. We had a plate number of a vehicle,
Okay.
And we're able to track him down that way.
All right, and he did not witness the shooting, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then your last text or call of significance?
The next one was at 9 o'clock. Bianca Martin called the communication center.
And when Bianca Martin called the communication center on that 911 call, was that as a result of Keith being shot?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you, during your investigation, also try to determine, either you or your department or others in your unit, whether Curtis Gill was in fact the owner of the dirt bike in question?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And what did you find?
That the serial number or VIN on the title matched the VIN or title number on the serial number on the bike that was on scene and that we had at our crime scene garage.
All right, and I'm going to show you what I marked for identification purposes, the state certificate number 18. Can you tell me if you recognize that or know what it is? Oh, I do. Let's go with 18.
Okay, this is a title for a 2012 Yamaha owned by Curtis Gill.
Okay, and that title matches up to the bike that was at the scene?
That's correct, identification number matched, yes.
Okay. During your investigation and when you were at the crime scene, did you notice the pills that have been testified about here along the streets next to the two cars that were, well, one was being worked on?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that would have been on the west side of Dan Mead Street?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In regards to those pills, did you do anything in regards to those pills?
Other than pointing them out to our crime scene unit, I did not do anything in collecting or processing.
They collected them, but then after they were collected, I guess, did you have any, I guess, input as to whether they be tested or just be put in property or what?
No, we sent them out as a ongoing investigation. We would want those tested for full information.
Okay. And so you had them tested?
Yes, sir.
Who does your testing?
It's either sent to BCI or we have someone who comes to our station and does testing. It depends on the drug being tested.
All right. And after you get the test, do they send you then a report?
Yes, sir.
And did you get a report back in this case?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you what I'm marking for identification purposes as State's Exhibit number 19. Yeah. Can you tell me what that is?
That would have been a report of the evidence that was submitted for testing.
Okay, and who did that report?
That report on here was by Michael Veltman. He's a forensic scientist.
Okay, and he does testing for you, the Akron Police Department?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what is the result that it shows?
Evidence submitted was a sealed clear bag containing a blue substance. The result was a blue substance, 0.1 gram oxycodone present.
All right. Now, you heard testimony that the pills that were collected were melting, disintegrating from the rain and stuff. Mm-hmm. So the weight that it has there, 0.0 gram, to be fair, that's not the actual weight of all the pills combined. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That would have just been the one part that he tested.
Yeah, they got some up to be able to collect a sample to be tested as best they could.
And in regards to, in your world of criminal investigation, you find a pile full of pills and they all look alike and they're all the same color. Do they test every pill or do they just test one as a sample?
I don't do the testing, but they're all matching. They test one.
Okay. So only one was tested, but in your world, you would make that assumption that the rest of them are all of the same a drug?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One of the other things that I know had been testified about and was brought up probably in the interviews was about that motorcycle, or the dirt bike.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you familiar with dirt bikes at all?
Yeah, actually, I was probably 12 years old. I had a Yamaha YZ80 that I drove in the cornfield behind our house.
Okay. So same model, maybe a little older model.
Maybe just a little older model. Thank you for being so kind.
So we heard a lot about this red line or rev line. Mm-hmm. What is that?
Basically, when, and in this situation, the clutch is engaged and the throttle is nearly all the way down or practically all the way down. So the engine is revving at near max RPMs. Okay. And so, for people that aren't motorcycle riders, how would that compare to like a car? Well, back in our day, when they had manual transmission cars, there was the clutch, the brake, and the accelerator. So if you would have had the accelerator, or sorry, the clutch engaged and had the accelerator all the way to the floor, your car is screaming at high RPMs. It would be a similar, obviously a car's 4,000 pounds, the Yamaha YZ80 isn't, but a similar principle.
Okay, so it's kind of like when we see people that are drag racing in the street, they rev the car in neutral and then they throw it into gear and the car spins and takes off.
Correct, yes.
All right. On a motorcycle, like the one you said you had when you were a kid, what happens when you rev and we call it the throttle, that's the same as the gas or the
Correct,
accelerator.
accelerator, the throttle, yes.
So you got the throttle going and then you all of a sudden release that clutch and it goes into gear. What happens?
The bike's going to very rapidly lurch forward, being a rear-wheel drive vehicle that it is. The front is very light, so it's going to go at a very high speed with the front end more than likely coming off the ground, which I've done it multiple times as a kid. I mean, the thing actually would flip out from underneath, maybe from the high RPMs and losing control.
All right. And so just in case there's people that don't know what rear wheel drive is, what does that mean, rear wheel drive?
It would be similar to a bicycle. You know, the drive part, like your pedals on a bicycle, but it'd be a drive gear on the motorcycle, is connected by a chain to the rear wheel. So the driving part of the vehicle, of the motorcycle, would be the force, the propellant for the motorcycle.
All right. So basically the motor on this bike makes the back wheel spin, the front wheel just
For steering.
rolls freely and is pushed by the back tire.
Correct.
Okay. When that situation happens where you have I don't know, a full throttle, but definitely high throttle, I mean, in the 911 call, we can hear in the background what appears to be the revving of this bike, correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you do this, you said that it'll pop it up. Does that make the bike hard to control?
It makes it nearly impossible to control if the front wheel's off the ground, because you can't steer the bike, and
All right.
that between that and the speed makes it difficult to control.
All right, so in the scenario we've heard with the testimony where we have Keith Johnson starting up the bike and he goes to take off, but Curtis Gill grabs the bike and he's able to keep him from letting the clutch out, correct? That's what we heard?
That's correct. That's what we heard.
Okay. So at this point in time, if you're trying to struggle over the clutch, and in the meantime, to get him to let that clutch go, you throttle up, that doesn't do anything. It doesn't make the bike move anymore, does it?
As long as the clutch is engaged and the bike's in gear, it does not.
All right. So then when you heard testimony about walking the bike up or something, would you be able to do that when you had the clutch disengaged?
If the clutch is in, as it were, it's essentially like being in neutral, so it could be rocked back and forth. It could be freely pushed.
All right, so he could move the bike, try to get away from Curtis, and then try and get the bike to go forward on its own, or motorized.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's go back. We've got the investigation, you've got the interviews, you've got the text messages, phone call records, you've reviewed all that. You already know who did it, so to speak. What do you do then? And I know you sent some stuff to be tested, you got the title, you checked all that out. What's next?
Well, the night of, well, it's probably the early morning hours of the 21st by that point, but the night of the 20th, which was the incident, after conducting interviews that we were able to get at that point, we made a phone call to the police legal advisor to run the fact pattern by that we had right then, bearing in mind it was still in the infancy, early stages of the investigation.
All right, and you run that by the police legal advisor, and then what do you do after that?
A police legal advisor, after running a fact pattern by her, she authorized criminal charges to be signed, and we do so on her recommendation.
And you signed charges against Mr. Knight, and he was placed under arrest that day, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And those initial charges were what?
involuntary manslaughter, and felonious assault.
Okay. And then after that process, is your investigation still continuing?
Yes, sir.
And then ultimately, you take that and you present that to the grand jury, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's where Mr. O'Brien talked about in his voir dire, that's just to get the paperwork, to get the indictment, get the process going. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And after the grand jury process, it came out as a murder and felonious assault. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. Once that indictment is then done, the court process takes over. Is that fair too?
Yes, sir.
All right. At that point in time, is your investigation completely done, or is it somewhat ongoing?
It's still somewhat ongoing. We don't have all of our test results back. I mean, it's, you know, it evolves over time, but it was, at the point that's presented to the grand jury, it was, the majority of it was completed.
Okay. During this process, you told us that basically it wasn't a whodunit anymore because Mr. Knight basically identifies himself by his name and social security number on a 911 call and tells us that he shot this man in what he believed to be in the chest. Were you then able to identify the man, William Knight, and by social security number and name, and put the person to the name and match that up?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the person you were able to find that was making that 911 call and who was arrested, do you see him here in court today?
Yes, sir.
Could you please point him out and describe what he's wearing?
He's next to...
Judge, would stipulate that Mr. Knight is in court.
Very well, Mr. Knight, his identification is kind of stipulated.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Judge.
Mr. O'Brien.
Detective Laughlin. Okay, if we go by the same rules with every other witness I've cross-examined?
Yes, sir. I've been here for all of them, so yes, sir.
And you have been here and listened to all the testimony of all the previous witnesses. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Detective Laughlin, would you agree with me that a truck that's moving can be a weapon?
Can be, yes.
Would you agree with me that a car that's moving can be a weapon?
Yes, it can.
Would you agree with me that a motorcycle that's moving can be a weapon?
To a lesser extent, yes.
Would you agree with me that a dirt bike that's moving can be a weapon?
Depending on the size, to a lesser extent, yes.
It can still be a weapon. Correct?
To a lesser extent, yes. It's not in
It can
comparison to a car.
cause injury, and it could even cause death going fast enough. Correct?
I'm not an expert, so I can't specify whether it can or cannot cause death.
It can certainly cause injury, can it not?
Yes, it can.
Would you agree with me that this night on Danny, March 20th, 2017, that area was not very well lit? Do you agree with that?
There was a street light at the house directly to the south of 797. Obviously, as I explained when I arrived on scene, there were cruisers with headlights on, overhead lights. We're all using flashlights, so I can't specifically comment on the exact lighting conditions at the point that I was on scene.
Remember testifying in an earlier hearing and saying that it was not a very well lit area. April 6, 2017, page 19, line 12.
Well lit as in the number of streetlights. Yes, there was limited number of streetlights on that street.
2 weeks after this incident, sir, did you testify under oath that it was not a very well-lit area?
That is correct.
You've had a chance to see some of the photos. Well, numerous photos, is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. Would you agree with me that, and you had a chance to look on the screen or your own little screen here, would you agree with me that a lot of those backgrounds, it was very dark?
Yes, depending on how it was backlit with a flashlight, you know, when they were taking pictures or illuminated.
The illumination was coming from...
Artificial.
Right.
Yes, sir.
LED or cruisers, headlights, or a
Correct.
flash, something like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You indicated that somewhere along the line, you figured a self-defense claim was in the offing. Is that correct, sir?
When we're conducting an investigation, we don't take an investigation down a specific path. We look at it from all angles to make sure we're doing a full and complete investigation, and that would have been one of the possibilities in this case in the early stages of the investigation.
So you didn't discount it right off the bat, did you?
No, sir.
There were a multitude of phone calls to the police department that night by Mr. Gill, and then the last one by Michelle Gill. Is that a fair statement?
Curtis made, not to our communications center, Curtis made, I believe, 4 calls for communications center. Other calls to various numbers within our building that may or may not have been answered.
Is it safe to say he was trying to reach the police department on 8 or 10 occasions?
Yes, sir.
And Michelle, at around 8:57, did try to reach also the police department.
She did call and reached our communications center.
Communications
Well,
is
yeah.
the police department, is it not?
I would not generalize that. We have lots of numbers and lots of departments within our police department. Some are answered, some are not. So I would like to be more specific and say it was to our dispatch
Is
center,
it-
communications center.
Is it a 911?
Yes, that is our 911 center.
If I'm not mistaken, that's also, the communications center also handles fire calls?
Yes, I have a fire dispatch up there. All the calls come in through one call taker, and then they're sent to the appropriate dispatch.
And one of the first calls that Mr. Gill makes, he makes to his daughter and says, "Hey, we found the bike," we think, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So is it unreasonable for Mr. Gill to ask for police assistance to, in my phrase, referee picking up a stolen bike?
That's not unreasonable. It's actually what we would prefer the course of action to be.
So Mr. Gill was doing the right thing even from a police standpoint, correct?
Initially.
Was the tone of the initial calls, or responses rather, from the police department indicated in the affirmative that they would help Mr. Gill?
Yes, it was a waiting pending call. It was not, this call was not disregarded, no.
At no time did they ever say, "We're never coming," did they?
No, sir.
So Mr. Gill has a reasonable expectation that he's going to get some Akron Police Department help.
Yes, sir.
When did you arrive on the scene?
I believe roughly 9:15, possibly.
There's a log sheet that an officer always keeps, don't they?
Yes.
And as a police officer arrives on scene, whether he's patrol, detective, high law, someone logs that in, correct?
That's correct. That's why I testified earlier. I did
Right.
log in.
Okay. So you're not there when the shooting takes place, correct?
That is correct.
And from some of the information you gather, Mr. Knight is about 90 feet away the second shot, the fatal shot, takes place?
I don't know the exact distance. I believe that would have been measured by our crime scene, but somewhere in
You
that...
remember testifying to that fact about a year ago, that it was about 90 feet away?
Possibly would have been after the measurement by our crime scene. I would say, without a specific memory, if that's what's in the report, then I testified it was about 90 feet away.
All right. And did you say in your sworn testimony that that's a pretty long shot?
Yes.
Did you not, sir?
Yes, it is.
And did in part of your testimony that it was at a moving target?
Yes.
And you've already testified it's a dark night? Correct, sir?
I believe I testified according to what you said, it was not well lit.
You got a report back, I think, from, if not BCI, your own drug unit, that these oxycodone pills these pills were oxycodone. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. And we heard testimony from Sergeant Morstall
Mostar.
that there was approximately 25 of these pills. Is that correct, sir?
I didn't count them. He would, see, they would have been on processing. They would have been more in tune with, but there was a number of them there, yes.
Well, you were here, I think, early this morning. Didn't you hear the good sergeant say there were about 25 pills?
He might have said that. I wasn't specifically hearing that number, but if you said he said 25, then...
Having oxycodone is illegal, is it not?
It's illegal.
All the trouble. If Mr. Johnson is headed south on Danby, he's headed toward Eastwood, is he not?
That would be the direction he'd be heading.
And to the best of our testimony, there's nothing really blocking his way to get to Eastwood, is there?
If he was under control of the bike and driving it, there was not, no.
Well, let's be real clear about that. You weren't there, correct, Lieutenant?
That is correct.
So you don't know if he's out of control or not, do you?
We get that information based on interview of witnesses.
Supposition, correct?
Yes,
So you weren't there?
that is correct.
And we've heard testimony from Badgett and from Ward and from Spraggling that you ran that bike up and down the road a couple of times to warm it up, and none of them said he was out of control, right?
That's what they said.
We also heard, I believe, Mr. Badgett say that he knew how to ride that bike. We also heard testimony that Ward had seen him ride the bike. Correct?
That's what we heard.
We never heard any testimony from either one of them that said he was out of control, did we?
Objection. Facts, not evidence. He's misstating the facts and evidence.
Well, if that's not the facts that the captain recalls, he can change that.
Then my objection is that it's not relevant whether he recalls it or not. He's just asking to repeat what he remembers these people saying. What is that relevant to witness in this case then?
Okay, well, he did the investigation. You can ask him if that's what was part of the investigation.
Your Honor, I don't want to cloud things up. I'll withdraw. The jury could recall.
Go ahead.
Mr. Johnson had no impediment to leave on Eastwood, did he?
There's nothing in the road blocking if he chose to leave.
To the best of your knowledge in your investigation, did Mr. Knight ever deny shooting Mr. Johnson?
No, he did not.
And the last part of Michelle Gill / William Knight's phone call at around 8:57, Mr. Knight takes the phone and says what?
I don't remember it verbatim, but
Just come close.
said he shot him, gave his personal identification, and said he had no choice. I believe that was some brief synopsis of what it was. I believe he said he had no choice. I think he said he was coming at his, I think it changed a couple times. I think once he said he's coming towards his daughter, then I think he said he's coming towards his daughter and son-in-law, then he said he's coming towards all of us. I think he gave multiple variations, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong.
This man takes the phone, gives his social security number, doesn't he?
He gives a social security number that we then did verify was him, yes.
Gives his name, correct?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't hide anything, correct?
Correct.
Takes the gun, and instead of having the gun on him or in his hand, which could be pretty dangerous, correct?
Yes, sir.
Because police officers say the first thing, let me see your hands, right?
Under these circumstances, that's definitely what we'd want to see.
So Mr. Knight putting the gun down, but close for the police, not a bad idea, is it?
Not a great idea, but not a bad idea.
And Mr. Knight, after his social security number and his name, he tells the dispatcher, I had to shoot. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, because he's going to run down my family. Is that pretty close?
He said his daughter, then his daughter, son-in-law, and him. So he specifically said it that way, but paraphrasing, yes.
Daughter's family, right?
Yes, sir.
Son-in-law would be family?
Yes.
All right. Detective, Lieutenant, hey, just to be sure, just
Captain.
my own
Captain.
pass to the police station, would it be Detective Lieutenant or Lieutenant Detective?
Well, actually, I'm captain now.
Well, that's true.
And actually, back then, it was quite a conversation whether you're a detective lieutenant or lieutenant detective, and I don't know if there's even a right answer to that.
I just don't want to get some lieutenant giving me a strange look.
No hard feelings, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Anything further?
No, Judge, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Captain. You may step down. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the last witness for the evening. We will break then for tonight. If you would report again in the morning to the jury room at 8:45. We keep pushing it back about 15 minutes. That's more about what I have to do first than anything else, but there's no reason for you to get here earlier because I know that I will be doing something else. So if you would report at 8:45, again, do not discuss this matter at home. Do not talk about it amongst yourselves. Do not look into the matter, do any research, or read anything about the case. We will see you in the morning. Thank you.
All rise. Go ahead and leave your notepads facing on your chair. Follow me.